Alright everyone, let's take a breath after watching that 9th episode of The Haunting of Bly Manor, the follow-up to The Haunting of Hill House on Netflix. Today, we are talking spoilers, so many details hidden throughout this show. We're going to try our best to tie in those final few scenes of the 9th episode. That's where our focus will be. We will talk about a couple of plot points that lead in to those final few episodes, but I need your comments down below. How do you feel about The Haunting of Bly Manor? Were all of your questions answered? Did you get the scares that you wanted? For me, and the non-spoiler reviews on the channel, it wasn't as scary as maybe I anticipated. It was much more of a gothic romance, but that may be what some audience members are looking for. Okay, enough chatter. Let's get into it. Also, if you like these spoiler videos and you're a fan of horror, be sure to leave this vid a thumbs up. Okay, so our main cast of characters include Miles, Flora, Henry Wingrave, Owen, Mrs. Grose, Danny, Miss Jessel, Jamie, and Peter. We also have the narrator, and the question was posed right off the bat. Okay, who is the narrator? Obviously, there is a significance here. We do get that tie-in in the final episode, but it was definitely an interesting choice to have someone narrate this story, telling it to a large group of individuals attending a wedding at Bly Manor. So, in the first episode, we are introduced to everyone. Danny, coming from America, trying to find a job. We see her go in for the interview at first. Henry Wingrave, being the imposing individual that he is, does everything he can to push her away, but she is this no-nonsense type of girl, even though she is extremely sweet as well. So she gets the gig, she's introduced to Mrs. Grose and Owen being the cook, Mrs. Grose essentially running this entire household with the absence of the mother and the father that we will talk about here in just a second. But Danny has an interesting first few nights. She's introduced to the kids, perfectly splendid Flora, and Miles, who seems to act a bit older than he is, but everything goes well until she is locked in a closet at the end of the first episode, and as most people would, starts to have a bit of a panic attack, not only because she's locked in a closet due to these creepy kids, but also because she herself is being followed around by a ghost. Now, we have no clue who this ghost is for the first few episodes, but we know there is a significance there, and it has to do with her backstory. Moving into episode 2, we find out that something has been tracking Mud all through the house. Mrs. Grose believes it's the kids, but there is also something a bit peculiar about the children. Not only Flora, because she is playing with some freaky-looking dolls in this freaky-looking dollhouse that keeps opening and closing by itself. Yeah, that's not normal. But also Miles, who seems to have a bit of a temper tantrum, and it's almost as if the children forget how they had just been acting almost a second later. And we see that as Miles goes back to school. Miles himself seems to be a good student, seems to be a sweet kid. But we find out that old Peter is the guy who's actually causing this ruckus. Well, he's just a jerk. And this is when we finally start to see these faceless demons kind of scurry all throughout the house, but for some reason, Flora doesn't seem to be afraid. We see the scene where she just turns around and shushes the creepy ghost with the noises. She's extremely confident for what looks to be a young girl. Moving into episode 3, we get our first look at the romances, plural, but the main romance at the beginning of the show between Peter and former Danny, aka Miss Jessel. Now, we've seen Miss Jessel standing next to the lake a couple of times, just all creepy-like. But this is kind of a backstory between those two characters. We figure out who they are, why they are in the position that they are in, why we keep seeing Peter just show up in the glass. Well, he's up to something. And we figure out eventually how Peter dies being dragged by this faceless demon down the hallway. It's a bad way to go out. I mean, the girl just had to use the restroom, and you're getting in her way. Yeah, I would do the same thing. I wouldn't. That's terrifying. Now, episode 4 is interesting. This is Danny's backstory. This is when we figure out who has been haunting her this entire time. We see that it was indeed her husband-to-be, or her husband, but she realizes that she doesn't have the feelings that she wanted to have for him. She realizes that she may not be into him at all, and when she breaks the news, It breaks his heart. It's this tragic argument between them, and as soon as he gets out of the car, I think we all knew what was going to happen. So it wasn't an unpredictable moment, but it was an impactful moment, and we see why his eyes have been glowing. He sees the lights of the oncoming vehicle that immediately smashes him. Now, somehow, he's not dead immediately, but he does indeed die in the hospital, where we see Danny and his parents as well. Truly a heartbreaking moment. So it's not just Bly Manor that is providing us the ghosts here. She has her own demons to deal with. Episode 5 is the episode, in my opinion, where everything starts to come together. And not that these were major questions that we had, but when the show first started, I said to myself, it wouldn't surprise me if some of these characters are already dead. We know Mike Flanagan as the director. We know he has a trick up his sleeve, but the level that this episode went to, seeing Mrs. Grose realize that she is reliving all of these memories, she's caught in a time loop of sorts. Why is she here? Why does she continue to have the same conversations? But at least now she is aware, cognitively aware that she is doing this, but there's still something there that is keeping her from telling the others. And that's when we realize that Miss Jessel and Peter are not the only ghosts of the household. She sees her body at the bottom of that well. Turns out she has been dead this entire time. That's when we go back to the beginning of episode 1, when she was looking in the well, turns around and sees Danny for the first time. That revelation was incredible. Episode 5 is the turning point of this season, when everything starts to come together. Now, episode 6 is much more of a Henry episode. Henry, the uncle, who's not really been there. Why is that? Well, we see that he actually had an affair with Flora and Miles' mother, and we realize that it goes deeper than that. He may be a father. So many things are coming together for his backstory, but we're still trying to figure out, why is he having conversations with himself? And we see here the conversation that he has right before his lover's husband dies, the father and the mother of Miles and Flora, essentially describing this demonic version of Henry, how he sees him now that he has done this to that family. And that version of him comes to life after the death of those two characters. So that is a demon that Henry is having to deal with, get over, overcome, accept, and relive over and over. Now, all of this has happened. We still haven't talked about the character of Jamie, who is the gardener, and at first, she's really the only character who doesn't say all that much. We have Owen, who is just the sweetest and the nicest guy. We have Mrs. Grose, who will do anything for those kids, but Jamie is quiet, but there slowly starts to become this romance that blossoms between Danny and Jamie, and it's this underlying romance that really starts to hit in the final few episodes that really becomes the forefront of this show. And this show is consistently and constantly romance at the forefront. Whether it's the affair that Henry had, whether it's the relationship between Peter and Miss Jessel, whether it's that slight blossoming romance between Owen and Mrs. Grose that we see come back around later on when he names the restaurant after that conversation that they had. That was such a sweet conversation, and we saw how much he not only loved his mother because he's taking care of her, how much he loved Mrs. Grose. Isn't he just, he's just the best guy. Owen is the best guy. Owen for president. I mean, I guess he doesn't live in the United States, but I would vote for Owen because he's the best. Now, we'll get back to Danny and Jamie, but the romance that is the focus of episode 7 is, once again, Miss Jessel and Peter, who just walking around as ghosts. We see how Miss Jessel goes out. Now, she tries to swim back to the top. She really does, but it's too late at that point. Peter, being the conniving and kind of disgusting guy that he is, pulls her back down. It is Peter's idea to take over the kids. He is willing to sacrifice the lives of Miles and Flora just to get what he wants. And that's when we get into episode 8, which is the black and white origin of Bly. It is somewhat of an exposition episode, but it does show the true story, the original no-faced or faceless ghost, and how they have all forgotten who they are. They've essentially lost their identity, which is displayed to us through a lack of a face. It's creepy, but it's also sad. So here we have another love triangle, a widower named Mr. Willoughby, a character by the name of Perdita, a character by the name of Viola. Perdita wants to make him feel welcome at the beginning. She falls in love with Mr. Willoughby, but then Viola arrives, and that's where the triangle becomes a bit more complicated. So he and Viola have a daughter named Isabel, but then Viola gets really sick. And really all of this starts from the prayer that's given to her. It's supposed to make her journey into the afterlife just a bit easier, but she refuses to repeat it. So Viola's gone. Perdita marries Arthur. Because of their financial situation, they decide to go back and find Viola's gowns and her jewels. But by doing that, the spirit is unleashed. It kills her, which is kind of revenge from her violent death. So essentially they killed each other. How great. So what we're seeing now is Viola's spirit. She's always wanted to be reunited with Isabel, who is her daughter. And then Arthur's like, I'm going to throw this chest in the lake because that seems like the right thing to do. And that's when Viola says, you know what? I'm going to leave this lake. I'm going to walk around this manor. I'm going to snap people's necks as I go. That probably wasn't planned. And this almost creates this gravity as it's described in the show around this manor. So when anyone dies on the grounds of the manor, they are essentially, and that's what this is, left in purgatory. So all of the victims in the path of Viola, who consistently goes and visits her daughter's bedroom, they are killed, their spirits are left at the manor, and their memories begin to fade over time. And with that comes the visual. Their faces begin to fade over time. We see the child, we see multiple examples, and this starts to tie in what we have seen in prior episodes, the interactions with Flora and these faceless individuals. We now know who they are. Now, let's talk about this final episode when the Lady of the Lake, aka Viola, is trying to drag Danny into the lake and kill her. Now, one question I do have is, why wasn't Danny dead immediately? I mean, everyone else seemed to be dead immediately, but you know what? The struggle game wins. Good job, Danny. But, for the sake of Danny, things get a little bit better when she finds Flora. She starts to somewhat see her daughter. So she grabs Flora, we all assume thinking that she's Isabel, and tries to take Flora into the lake. Jamie and Owen arrive, Henry arrives, almost dies trying to save her life until Owen saves him with CPR. And to make things a bit easier on Flora, Miss Jessel tells her to say, "It's you, it's me, it's us," which allows her to fill her body so she will not feel the pain and the agony of death. That doesn't work. You know why it doesn't work? Because Danny does the exact same thing and ends up saving the life of Flora, which also saves all of the spirits who have been in purgatory this entire time, from Miss Jessel to Peter to Hannah. The curse is lifted, Flora is safe, everyone is okay. The only problem is that the spirit of Viola is now trapped inside of Danny, and one day, Danny will be the Lady of the Lake. Now, even though Danny is doing everything in her power to fight this, knowing that one day she will become the Lady of the Lake, this will all come crawling back to her, Jamie says, you know what? Let's leave, let's live our life, let's fall in love, let's do everything we can do before this day, and I'll be with you every step of the way. And that's why I truly see this story as a gothic romance, as a love story, many love stories, but at the end of the day, this was the main love story. So they're living their life, everything is happy, Jamie gets a promise ring, everything that they can do to stray as far away as they can. They even visit the restaurant of Owen, who again named it after the conversation that he had with Hannah, which I thought was incredible. And they have a bit of a discussion about what happened at Bly Manor, but within that conversation, they talk about the fact that the children, Flora and Miles, don't necessarily remember what happened. It's almost as if their memories have been wiped of all of these horrifying experiences. Now, it could be the fact that those who were there long enough just lost their memories, or the fact that they were constantly being infested by Peter and Miss Jessel. And essentially, that means Flora doesn't even remember that Danny sacrificed herself to save her. And this is when Danny starts to see the reflection of the Lady of the Lake, whether it's in a window or in a glass, it's all coming back to her. Danny, she feels it coming. She feels the presence of Viola. At one point, she has her hands on Jamie's neck. She's seeing the reflection in the water. So Danny, she travels back to Bly Manor, where she becomes the new Lady of the Lake. It happened. It's sad. We're all sad. Pain. Hashtag pain. So Jamie, she tries everything. She goes back to Bly Manor. She spouts out, it's you, it's me, it's us. Nothing works. Whereas Miss Jessel was trapped when she swam underneath. This is a bit of a different relationship here. Dani doesn't want Jamie to sacrifice herself. She doesn't want new victims. She allows Jamie to live out the rest of her life and become the narrator. What? That's the twist. And we go back to the first episode. It's like, how does she know these individuals? Why is she at this wedding? Well, the wedding is Flora's wedding. And we find this out through a conversation where she says, "Oh, that's strange. Flora is my middle name." And that's not weird, okay? I go by my middle name. My first name is actually Timothy. I don't like it as much. And that's when at the reception, we see all of our characters just much older. And it's a bit difficult to recognize them because the actors that they got don't necessarily look like, well, Flora does. But the others don't necessarily look like their younger selves. We now know that the narrator is Jamie. We see her younger self, Miles and Owen. And that's when we see the final scene of Jamie drawing a bath, hoping to see Dani's reflection, and I'm sure that's something she's done over and over on a daily basis. And Dani's hand is shown on Jamie's shoulder at the end. Now, that's the only explanation that you're not going to get from me, because we don't know for sure if that's just something that we're seeing as an audience. And the only other major open-ended question, I mean, there are a few. How did their parents die? That's never necessarily described. But a question that a lot of people will have is, well, why doesn't Flora recognize Jamie? Well, this is mostly because we see through Owen's toast. It's hinted that he does have a relationship with this family still. It went beyond Bly Manor. Owen stayed close, whereas Jamie, well, right after Bly Manor, she just kind of left and never returned, and not being able to remember anything from that instance, well, there's your reason. So again, it's a love story. It's a tragic love story. So many sad moments, not as many scary moments as The Haunting of Hill House. So I do believe that will be a point that divides audiences, but there is a lot to dive into. And I feel like it's a show that on second watch will be much better because you'll be able to notice these Easter eggs. You'll be able to talk about everything that comes around in the final few episodes. Not a perfect show, for sure. There were exposition-filled moments and character moments that weren't as hashed out and explored as they should have been. But overall, The Haunting of Bly Manor is genuinely full of beautiful love stories, and it does come back around in episode 9. So I need your comments down below. How do you feel about this series as a whole? This was a beast of a video. Took forever to make. I already know it did, and I've not even edited it yet. So if you'd like to leave this video a thumbs up button, I appreciate it. Let me know if you want to see more of these. We're talking Netflix every single week, whether it's a non-spoiler review or an explanation video. You are truly the best. I appreciate it. Stay tuned. More to come. My spoiler-filled video for The Boys is on the channel now. I'll see you guys very soon.